And hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Sports Station. I am Daniel Graham. Joined with me today is Mark and Sarah, and of course, Mike Eccles. And Mark, I know you had a lot of things that you wanted to talk about today when we were pre-gaming the show.
A whole lot.
Of course, the MLB Hall of Fame is coming up. You wanted to rattle off some of the inductees, and I think it's a very rich list of inductees from what I saw.
Just had the Baseball Hall of Fame induction, Pro Football Hall of Fame induction coming up. We'll get to that in a second, but you're right. This is probably as good a class as the Baseball Hall of Fame has ever inducted, save the first few seasons when they were inducting all the players from the 20s and the 1900s. But yeah, they had three managers in Bobby Cox, Joe Torre, and Tony La Russa, three players, and Greg Maddux, Tom Glavine, and Frank Thomas. A very worthy class. I don't see how you could have any problem with any of those inductees.
You know, and in years past, I've always seen that they always seem to dominate, the players seem to dominate the class more than managers do. But you have three managers, not just the quantity of the managers being inducted this year, but the quality of the managers being inducted. Joe Torre, Bobby Cox, and Tony La Russa. Each with equal longevities to the team they were with. I think the only person that has had success with more than one team, arguably, would be Tony La Russa with the Cardinals and the Athletics.
Also, Chicago White Sox.
Chicago White Sox.
to a division title in, I think,
83.
Thank you, Mike. Mike Eccles is in studio, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mark. I also wanted to comment, my goodness, how many times are you going to see one team induct 300-win pitchers? I mean, both Maddux and Glavine, boy, I tell you, during the regular season, they were just amazing. Of course, when they got to the World Series, like in 96 and 99.
Why am I not surprised you brought that up?
But I have to tell you, they were so lights out during the regular season. 300 wins for both. And the funny thing is, you have those two on the same staff. We're not even including John Smoltz. What a pitching staff they had for so long. And Bobby Cox, wow, handled that pitching staff extremely well.
I really think the Braves were coming up at a very unfortunate time because that was back when the resurrection of the Yankees were coming around. Around 95 onward, the Yankees were starting to come back from their abyss, and they started dominating the 90s. And everyone thought that the Braves, from like 91 to 95, they were going to be the team in the 90s. They were just going to roll on until the end of the decade. And then the Yankees started coming up with Jeter and all of them, and the Yankees just dominated. And a lot of people forgot how really dominant the Braves were back in those days.
Well, if you remember, maybe you might not remember this, Mike, you might remember this, when the Braves won their only World Series in 1995, Bob Costas' call final out was the team of the 90s has its World Championship. And they were absolutely perceived as the team of the 90s. Their World Series rings in 95 were engraved with team of the 90s. But you're right, Dan, they just ran into the Blue Jays in the early 90s, and they lost to the Blue Jays in 92. Lost to the Phillies in the LCS in 93. 2 years before that, they fell victim to the Twins, the Homer Hankies, and the Metrodome, and then
95 they put all together against Cleveland.
Absolutely, and then in the late 90s, the Yankees all of a sudden started putting together these great teams, and you're exactly right. They kind of got overshadowed by the Yankees for the last few years in the 90s.
Now, the Yankees proved in 99 they were the team of the 90s. But it's just amazing now when we go back to that class. Is not just those pitchers, but those managers. And I think all three of them, even though all three are retired, I think all three of them can still do a hell of a lot better job than most of the managers out there today.
I believe so.
I mean, La Russa, he could go anywhere.
Yeah.
And you know what La Russa really did? And I want to get your guys' opinion on this. When we talk about Hall of Fame managers, because I felt that Lou Piniella did a great job doing this, is dispelling the notion, the myth, that the American League and the National League are so different in the way that you approach them. And I thought that La Russa could jump from American League, National League, win both places. Same thing with Lou Piniella. Won the World Series with the Reds, had the real successful run with the Mariners, and it didn't matter, National League, American League, if you can manage, you're going to win. And that's what La Russa did.
Well, that's where we're both, Cox was also another one of these managers who had success in both leagues. Cox was the manager of the Blue Jays when they almost went to the World Series in '85 against the Royals. So both of these managers, you're right. I mean,
very good team in the 80s.
Torre won a division title with the Braves in '82.
What a lot of people forget was early on, Bobby Cox did have an earlier stint with the Braves before he went to the Blue Jays. Mm-hmm. I think that was when Ted Turner started taking over the team, and he wanted to be the manager, Ted Turner.
Well, Ted Turner wasn't sure if he wanted to manage the Braves or manage the pro wrestling on WCW, so he was still, he wasn't sure. He did put Torre in, though.
Yes.
And that's when
yes.
they had their great success.
Yes.
When they had the Dale Murphys, and there was another pitcher that he had that was really successful. But
Negro.
Dale Murphy was, of course, was it Phil Negro, right?
I think so.
But Dale Murphy, of course, was the face of that team. Oh, Bob Horner
Bob
was
Horner.
the other guy who was the big hitter for that team, and they won 2 division titles. And you know what? Joe Torre, both leagues. I forgot all about that. Both leagues, great
Right.
success, dispelled the whole myth.
But, with Cox and Torrey, each team, they had such a long tenure with just one particular team, you kind of forget what overshadowed their past accomplishments. Because, of course, Joe Torre was sort of a barnstormer of some sort. Before he was with the Yankees, he was with the Cardinals. He was the manager of the Mets, the Braves, like you mentioned, was pretty successful with the Braves. But when he came to the Yankees, it was as if everything just came together for him, and he got all those championship rings, first time in his career.
Well, that was an interesting thing because, as you mentioned, he managed the Mets, then the Braves, and the Cardinals, all 3 teams that he had played for, and he only had 1 postseason appearance with those 3 teams, and as you mentioned, it was the Braves. And he had a record that was well below 500 as a manager when the Yankees decided to make him their manager, and it was, like I said, he had no previous affiliation with the Yankees. He was never a Yankee farmhand. He never played for the Yankees. He never coached for the Yankees. Next thing you know, he managed them to one of the greatest championship runs, at least maybe the greatest championship run of the last 20 years, almost certainly.
But you got to remember, with the Yankees, they were already on the rise. It wasn't like they were looking for Torrey to turn
Oh,
the team around, because,
sure.
of course, it was Mel Stoudemire who put the team together, and then at the time it was Bob Watson who was the general manager.
Gene Michael.
Was it
I
Gene
think-
Michael or
well,
Watson?
Watson was the general manager I think at the time, but Gene Michael also was a key figure in that
Because
organization.
'96, you have to think about
Hey,
the
dude,
All Stars they had.
This
those
is
days.
where one guy does not get the credit sometimes I think he deserves. And that's Buck
No,
Showalter.
Buck Showalter.
Buck Showalter, remember, he managed the Yankees in 1994. They had the best record in the American League when the strike hit.
Yes.
And the strike ended the season.
Did I say Mel Stoudemire before?
Yes.
I meant to say Buck Showalter.
Right. Buck Showalter did a dynamite job. But you know what? Something happened in 95 after they lost to the Mariners. And George, the way he used to do, if he just didn't get a feel for you, you were out.
Right, the Billy Martin effect, pretty much.
Right. So
Right.
he didn't have the real feel for Buck Showalter.
Is-
And of course he was
You know,
out the door
you know, I
after
think it
95.
was one of those things. What have you done for me lately? Because the Yankees were up 2-0 in that AL.
Yes, yes.
And then the Miracle Mariners at the time came back and won it.
Yeah.
And so I think that was just
Don Mattingly's last game.
it was down
Game
there.
5.
Very unfortunate. But they brought in people like Wade Boggs, still consistent.
Jimmy Key.
Jimmy Key,
Paul
Charlie
O'Neill.
Hayes.
Paul Hayes was another team at that point. But they brought in Paul O'Neill to trade from Cincinnati. Yeah, they brought in a lot of good players. I mean, and also the big thing. This is what ran the Yankees. What Steinbrenner had done to run the Yankees into the ground previously was they kept all their young prospects, guys like Jeter, Mariano Rivera, Bernie Williams. They stayed with the team rather than being traded away for quick fixes, and that's one of the things that allowed the team to become great.
The one point I did want to get across was when Joe Torre went to do that job, I think the only thing that was asked of him, and I'm pretty sure he felt it too, was let the players have as much freedom as they can. Because there was enough talent on that team, and it was just one of those things where each person had to do they were on their own militia, just make sure that they did the most for their side of the bargain, and that can get them to a championship.
Well, one of the things where you guys were just mentioning, and you both mentioned it quite well, is going back over Torrey's career and where he managed. When he walked into the Yankee situation, I don't think he ever walked into a better situation. And I think that's why, like you say, the approach that he took was much different than approaches he took in the past, is because everything was already laid out for him.
Right.
He had an excellent pitching staff, which I think there's another guy who does not get enough credit, is Jimmy Key, for what he did in '96. But, he had a good pitching staff in front of him. He had some really good hitters. And you know what? He also had some surprises. I know we don't want to delve so much into that '96 team, but boy, who knew that Darryl Strawberry was going to have the year he had in '96, or even Dr.
Wow, that was. I can't even put that together with.
Yeah.
They brought in these veterans because they knew their history, they knew their talent. It was just a matter of them looking into themselves and trying to bring out the best to perform. And Doc Gooden coming in with that no-hitter, that guy was really on the brink of total irrelevance.
His career was pretty much over
because
of the drug use and all those
yeah.
things. Yeah.
And I believe he was suspended the season before.
Oh, he was suspended
Yeah,
for a while.
but he was, because he was on countless drug allegations with
Right.
the Mets, and he got suspended for that. And at one point, there was a poster of him in Times Square, was there not?
Somewhere in New York.
Yeah, in New York there was a poster of him.
on the side of a
For
building.
years.
Oh, it was on the side of a building. Yeah, it was
Right, for
painted in
years,
bricks.
like
yeah.
10 years, and then when he got suspended for that drug charge,
It
they
disappeared.
took it down. I'm sure he was devastated.
Well, yeah, they had. I mean, like now here, Duncan hit 340 that year. That was Tino Martinez's first year in New York, and he had a solid season. They had Tim Raines and Darryl Strawberry
Yeah.
and Bernie Williams and guys
And-
like that in the outfield.
Don't forget the big boy. Who was the big boy?
Joe Girardi.
No, Cecil Fielder.
Cecil Fielder.
We had Cecil Fielder. Well, Cecil Fielder's a much bigger boy than Joe Girardi.
That's debatable.
But I, you know what? When I think about all the stuff that we've all been mentioning, I think it all still comes back to Joe Torre.
Oh, certainly.
Absolutely.
It all goes
Yeah.
back to Joe Torre.
He had the ability to manage the personalities and let the players do
Yes.
who they were. He didn't get in the way, also.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I remember one time Carden was saying on Boomer Carden that he said any team could have came in and managed the Yankees during Joe
Any
Torre's
manager,
tenure.
you mean?
Any manager.
Yeah.
But no one could have done it like Joe Torre.
That-
Dave
Because
Graham,
that's
don't you bring up
absurd.
the names of other radio personalities on our podcast?
Well,
Don't you bring up other radio
but
personalities?
I had heard from people that anyone could have managed that team because they were so well
Okay,
talented.
that sounds much
that's
better.
absurd.
Boomer Carden.
That idea is
Yeah,
absurd.
singling people out.
It's patently absurd.
You want me to bring up? Well, cousin Brucey said that the Yankees.
Oh, cousin Casey.
I think there's a difference between
I think
one's credibility and the other.
I think but to get my point across,
Right.
Joe Torre is a manager that just knew how to handle that team. If you
Right.
brought in a hot-headed manager, someone who's gonna try to rile up something in the clubhouse, it may not have had the same effect.
Yeah.
Because something like, to the extent when Billy Martin was clashing heads with Reggie Jackson, and they eventually worked it out towards the end to get to a 77 championship. But if you had someone like that being like, okay, I wear the pants in this clubhouse, and everyone has to do my bidding, and the Yankees would be like, who do you think you are? Like, I'm getting more money than you.
Yeah. Well, I
Something
mean,
like that.
and we also had, you mentioned the players like Glavine and Smoltz. I mean, Glavine and Maddox and Frank Thomas getting inducted, all well-deserved inductees. Frank Thomas, probably one of the biggest Hall of Fame classes Baseball Hall of Fame had in years, because we have the voters who are so picky as to who they're going to pick and who they're going to induct and who they're not going to vote for.
But now I got a question for you guys.
Yeah.
Sure.
One of the things that you saw the day before the Hall of Fame induction, the rules have now changed that instead of being eligible for 15 years, you're only eligible for 10 years. And what a lot of experts are looking at is those guys from the steroid era are now going to start coming to the point where they're going to be ineligible in about a year or two. What do you guys think of that? The McGuire is almost ineligible now due to the new rules.
I thought they were grandfathered in, no?
No, only two people were.
Okay.
And that was Mattingly and three people. It was Mattingly and a couple of other guys have been grandfathered in because they're at the end of their 10 years now. So they're going to be, or they're at the end of their 15 years.
That makes sense.
So, but yeah, it's now cut to 10 years. So people like McGuire, Sosa, Rafael Palmeiro,
Right.
all right, Roger Clemens, these got Barry Bonds. Okay,
Yeah.
they're going to be coming to the point where in about a year or two, they're no longer eligible for Hall of Fame.
Yeah. That's going to be interesting because, as we mentioned before, these voters are really tough. Like we had a Baseball Hall of Fame season a couple years ago. They didn't induct anybody.
Yeah.
So trying to get these steroids guys past them is going to be really tough. And this is one of the things I wanted to ask you guys with the Pro Football Hall of Fame induction ceremony coming up this weekend.
Yes.
We have Baseball Hall of Fame where they just have a rule: 75% you're in or you're out, and they can induct 5-6 people if they didn't. They can induct nobody like they did a couple of years ago. Pro Football Hall of Fame, there's a rule they have to induct at least 5 guys each season. So you have a situation where, at least in my opinion, you have guys getting in who don't deserve to get in because they have to induct people. So I'm curious as to which system do you guys like better?
I personally feel I'm going to disagree with you on this one. I believe just because they have to have 5 doesn't mean they're not. I think they're not inducting people who should be in there. I think, and I've argued this for many years, that there's 2 players in particular who have yet to be inducted in the Hall of Fame that I think should have been in decades ago. No, I think that their criteria is much stronger than baseball. Now, the baseball writers, that's a different story.
Right.
Baseball writers are a different story because they're a guy. I mean, for goodness sakes, Maddox still only got 97% of the ballots.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Greg Maddox is only. Who are the other 3%?
Yeah.
Who are you that you're not voting Greg Maddox as a first ballot Hall of Famer?
Of course. It's
So with
ridiculous.
football, I think that there are guys who still are not getting on. But I think that anybody who gets into the NFL Hall of Fame rightly deserves that. Even if it's like we have to induct 5 at least. I still think because
Yeah.
there are so many players in football, there are much more players than there are in baseball.
Well, the other thing too is that with either or, there's a certain filter. So, like, yeah, you may have induct 5 in the NFL, but at least you're getting 5 of the top selections.
Well, of course.
Yeah, I just think, there are just so many players from in my opinion. And the same thing goes for baseball. I think there's a lot of baseball players who, for example, you look at a Don Mattingly. He just doesn't have the numbers compared to other players, and he may never get into the Hall of Fame. Yet, for a 10 or maybe a 9-year period,
I think it was a little
Was there
less
a-
than that.
because of his injuries.
Like it was like 84 to 88. Kind
You would include any of his 90s?
of. No.
Because he did put up some good numbers, some doubles, some triples, average.
Yes, but those weren't. He didn't put up numbers that were the numbers that he put up before, which were Hall of Fame numbers.
Which were Hall of Fame. It
Yeah.
just wasn't over a longer period
He
of time.
didn't have the power and the ability power that he had that had made him a star player before.
Yeah, and then you take a guy like a Jose Canseco.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you may look at him, you may laugh at him, but he came within a hair of hitting 500 home runs. And I'll tell you what, in my opinion, one of the most clutch hitters in the postseason. I still think of that home run for the A's against Toronto, going
Oh,
as
he crashed
far
it? Oh.
as any ball has ever been hit in the Sky Dome.
Well, also, you remember the grand slam he hit off Belcher in Game 1 in '88.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, people forget how good a hitter Canseco really was. So, well, I tell you what, we could spend. I don't want to spend any more time, you guys, all podcast long, talking about the guys I think should be in both the NFL and the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. But guys,
We really should.
Michael Strahan this Sunday,
Yeah.
awesome,
Mhm.
awesome.
And you know what? I was really annoyed at when a lot of people were arguing. I think you remember back when, again, I'm singling people out. I remember when Warren Sapp was being the most vocal. Not just being vocal, because I'm pretty sure there are other people saying, Michael Strahan, maybe you should wait a few more years before he gets properly selected. But I remember Warren Sapp was coming out, and he was actually going up against Michael Strahan, like some Giants personnel.
Right.
Because some people were saying, what's Warren Sapp talking about? And of course, Warren Sapp could have let it roll off his shoulder, be like, okay, I'm going to get criticism for what I said, but I'm going to stand by my point. He was singling them out too. He goes, how dare you, talk up to me? I don't think he's allowed to be in there yet. I think, and it just happened that, fate came in. And the voters, I mean, as a Giants fan, I don't want to put bias into Strahan being inducted, but his numbers and his contribution to the New York area, apart from being a New York Giant, he understood the criteria was to be in New York. He understood the environment New York is, and he made the most of it. And he's also a media darling.
Oh, of course.
Well, he's certainly in the line of the Frank Giffords and the Phil Simms.
Right.
When you come in, you play for the New York Giants, and you star for the New York Giants, and like you say, when you know how to accept the media and use it to your advantage, as Michael has, especially when you think of some of the things he went through personally. Some of his personal life got thrown onto the newspapers big time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Big time, and he handled it with grace. And now, let's be honest with you, you can't get Michael Strahan off the TV.
Well, first of all, I agree. Dan,
Especially at 9 o'clock.
But not only 9 o'clock, but on Sundays too.
That's
I wanted
right.
to go back to one of the points you made before about how people said that Strahan should have waited a few years. This kind of thing just drives me nuts. This idea that, well, you are X good of a player, so therefore you should wait X number of years before
Right.
you get in. You're the Hall of Famer
you know what?
or you're not. The
Well-
idea that you should wait a number of years to get in is so absurd.
Well, I think it's the argument of, Joe Montana. He gets in first ballot. He gets in his first year of eligibility. Name me another legend in the NFL.
Mike Eccles?
Chuck
No,
Dan-
not Mike Eccles, but
Dan Marino.
Dan Marino,
Emmett
yeah,
Smith,
absolutely.
yeah.
Emmett Smith. They
Gary
should be
Sanders,
first year Hall of Famers. And then so people were trying to we're considering Strahan to them like apples and oranges.
Yeah, I know, but they're not levels of Hall of Famers. We don't have
Right.
we don't have floors. Like there's the first floor, and there's a second floor, and they're Hall of Famers. Either they are or they're not. The idea that, well, Montana was better than Strahan, so Montana should get in his first year, Strahan in his third year. No, they were both Hall of Famers, and that's all we're going by. So the idea was because one player was a better Hall of Famer than the other, he should get in earlier is ridiculous.
Michael Strahan deserves to go to the Hall of Fame.
I agree.
And Warren Sapp, sometimes I just don't know what's coming out of his mouth. I really, because honestly, I will say this, and I don't care if he fires me because I now weigh almost as much as he does. Warren Sapp was overrated.
Really?
I believe
Okay.
so. I
Well,
believe he was overrated.
guys-
I believe he got paid way too much when he went to Oakland.
On that note, we're going to wrap up our first segment here on the Sports Station. We'll be back here with you in just a minute. We'll be moving on to the current state of the NFL. Giants and Jets training camp up next on the Sports Station.